Last time we talked about growing beyond the script you were handed and telling instead the story of friendship with God. Friendship with God allows us to tell the truth about our lives, the slowness, the strangeness, the gaps, all the loose ends that often don't fit into the scripts. Friendship with God means that God is not a judge, not a coach, not a cosmic vending machine, but a friend. Friend in our culture can mean almost nothing. It can mean someone who's an acquaintance. It can mean someone that you follow on Instagram. But in the world Jesus is speaking to, friend of God was a title. It was reserved for Abraham and it was reserved for Moses. The book of Exodus says that Moses spoke with God face to face as someone speaks to his friend. It was the highest possible category of relationship a human could have with the divine. This isn't a casual sense of the word. Not like an acquaintance or even a good buddy, but a friendship of intimacy and authenticity and loyalty. And then in the Gospel of John, Jesus says something astonishing to his disciples, his students, his followers, that I don't think we hear right anymore because the word has kind of lost its gravity. He says, I no longer call you servants, for I have called you friends. And Jesus extends this to his ragtag group of disciples, to a tax collector and to a political revolutionary, to blue-collar fishermen and to well-read nerds, to introverts that we really don't know much about, and to extroverts who grabbed all the headlines. Jesus extended the friendship of God to people who had, until that point in their lives, had never considered that God loves them as much as the patriarchs of the faith. That's the gospel claim. Not that you can work your way into the inner circle, not if you believe the right things or pray the right way, your story finally fits, but that the inner circle has broken wide open to the world and you're already invited, you're already in. Jesus calls this friendship. Now, biblical friendship isn't sentimental. It's much thicker than that. And it does these three things that we talked about before. And you can watch Jesus do all three in basically every encounter in the Gospels. This isn't a script. It's more like improv, the improv of love. Friendship confronts, friendship comforts, and friendship calls. Friendship confronts because a real friend loves you too much to leave you stuck in arrogance or pride or prejudice. Friendship comforts. It comes near to you in your pain and your distress, not to a cleaned up version of yourself that you wish you could present. And friendship calls. It invites you into a wider life than the one you were settling for. Often a wider life that includes people you'd rather not have to love. Confrontation, comfort, and calling, these are the three things to watch out for in these gospel passages. Because once you see them, you start to see how Jesus is working in the Gospels, and just as important, you see how Jesus has been working in your own life. Let me show you what I mean. 3 quick stories. Here's the first one. Jesus picks 12 people to be his closest circle. And among them, there's a guy named Matthew, who's a tax collector, which in that time meant a Judean collaborator with the Roman occupation. And Matthew would have been extorting his neighbors and his family and his friends. And another guy in that group was Simon, who's called the Zealot, which meant at that point an anti-Roman violent revolutionary. These two men, in any other context, would want each other dead. They're on opposite sides of the most polarizing political conflict of their time. It's said that Jesus at one point sent his followers out in twos to care for people. Can you imagine if he sent these two together, walking together, working together, maybe even camping out or rooming together along the way? Like, you'd have to imagine that they slept with one eye open. Jesus confronted them both. And he doesn't make them sign a statement. He doesn't say to Matthew, you have to denounce the Romans, or to Simon, you have to lay down your politics. He calls them as they are into shared proximity, shared life together around the same table, the same bread, the same mission. Go heal and cure and declare the goodness of God. Now, does that sound familiar to our day and age? Because we're living in a moment when every group in America, especially in American Christianity, is being told to choose a side, fly a flag, sign a statement. And here Jesus is doing this stunning thing. He's forming a community where the first loyalty is to a friendship that crosses the most coercive politics. He doesn't make them apolitical. Matthew and Simon were both deeply political people. He just refuses to let those politics be their deepest loyalty. Here's the second story. Two people that the world has thrown away. One is a man called the Gerasene demoniac. He lives in a graveyard. He's violent towards others, even violent towards himself. The community has tied him up, chained him up, and even that failed. He's the kind of person that every culture has, the one we cross the street to avoid, the one we call security on, the one whose pain has gotten so bad that nobody feels that it can be helped. Jesus crosses the stormy sea to reach him. That's the detail I want you to notice. It was that trip across the water in Mark chapter 4, that famous passage where Jesus calms the ocean. Jesus is going somewhere in that story, and he's going to this guy. The whole detour is for this one person that nobody else wants to deal with. The other is a Samaritan woman. In John chapter 4, she's the wrong ethnicity for a Judean to be talking to. She's the wrong gender for a male to be talking to. She has the wrong relationship history for a respectable rabbi to be talking to. Jesus goes to her anyway. And get this, it's the longest conversation recorded between someone and Jesus in all the Gospels. And this is the part that the script can't handle. He doesn't make either of them pray a prayer or recite a creed. He doesn't make her move to the right mountain or make him perform ritual cleanings. He doesn't make her clean up her life or make him clean up his act. He receives her protest and confirms her worship and sends her back to her own community as a witness. He passes straight through the social shame and fear for the demoniac to release him from his demons, and then asks for nothing in return. Notice what's happening. He comforts each as they need, and they turn that comfort into their calling to go and declare this loving and liberating friend to their hometowns. Here's the third story, and it's the hardest one. The night before Jesus dies, two of his closest friends fail him. Peter, his right-hand man, denies that he even knows Jesus 3 times to save his own skin. And Judas, another of the 12, sells Jesus out and hands him over to be arrested. Now, the scripts know exactly what to do with these two men. The conversion script says Peter had a true heart change and Judas didn't. The liturgy script says that Peter became the first pope and Judas got what was coming to him. Both scripts give you a clean villain and a clean hero. But the Gospels don't actually do that. The Gospels say that Jesus washed both of their feet on the same night, knowing what they were about to do. He didn't shame Peter into courage. He didn't physically stop Judas from leaving the room. He maintained their dignity. He left the door open for Peter to come back, which Peter eventually did. And he let Judas walk out, which Judas did. And when Judas finally came back to betray Jesus with a kiss, Jesus said, "Friend, do what you're here to do." That's not a soft Jesus. That's a fierce, non-coercive love that refuses to override anyone's agency, anyone's story, even when overriding it would have saved his own life. This is what friendship with God looks like at the bottom. It doesn't manipulate you. It doesn't shame you into compliance. It holds the door open and lets you choose. And it says that you're always invited. And if you come back, the welcome is real. And if you don't, the love of God is still real. So what does this mean for us? If you felt like you're on the wrong political side to be welcomed into a faith community, Matthew and Simon ate at the same table. So can you. If you felt like your life is too messy or too far gone for any of this to be for you, Jesus crossed the sea for one and crossed into a graveyard for the other, and he comforted both and sent them out without demanding anything from them. And if you failed badly, I mean really badly, the kind of failure you can't quite say out loud, Jesus washed Peter's feet, even though Peter denied him hours later, and the friendship was still there in the morning. Friendship with God does not require you to clean up first. God is a friend who comes near, tells the truth, and calls you outward into a wider life than the one you were settling for. Here's what I want to leave you with. Friendship with God isn't a doctrine you have to defend. It's not a club you have to join. It's not a pitch you have to sling. It's a relationship you may already be inside of. You are, in fact, already inside of it, whether you have words for it or not. And if you want to know whether you're inside it, don't only look for the dramatic moment or the best practices. Look for these three motions: confrontation, comfort, and calling. When has something confronted you and you knew somehow that the confrontation was love and was right? When in your life has something comforted you that you can't quite account for? How are you being called toward a person or a vocation or a reconciliation that you'd rather avoid? The gospel is a story of friendship that transcends guilt and shame and meaninglessness. That's the long handwriting of the Spirit of God in each of our lives. So tell your story, tell it honestly, and trust that God, who is the friend of all people, is waiting for you and is coming to you and is calling you. Trust the words of Job, who said, "Behold him who is my friend and not a stranger."